The fluorescent lights of the San Diego County Courthouse hummed softly overhead as 8-year-old Maya Johnson sat on the wooden bench outside courtroom 4B, her small legs dangling several inches above the floor. She clutched a worn stuffed elephant to her chest, the only possession she'd managed to keep through 3 foster homes in the past 14 months. The elephant's name was Ellie. She'd had it since she was a baby, a gift from someone she could barely remember now, a tall man with kind eyes who used to visit sometimes, who would swing her up onto his shoulders and make her feel like she was flying. Her mother had called him Uncle Jake. Her father had called him brother. Maya hadn't thought about Uncle Jake in a long time. It hurt too much to think about the before times, when her parents were alive and the world made sense. So she'd pushed those memories down, locked them away in a box in her mind that she tried never to open. Her social worker, Mrs. Patterson, sat beside her, reviewing documents in a manila folder. The hallway smelled like floor polish and old coffee, and Maya could hear muffled voices from behind the heavy wooden doors. She'd been in buildings like this before, too many times in the past 14 months. Courts and offices and waiting rooms, all of them blending together into a blur of fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs. "Are you doing okay, sweetheart?" Mrs. Patterson asked, not looking up from her papers. Maya nodded, even though it wasn't true. Nothing had been okay since the accident. Since the night the police officers came to her school and took her to a building that smelled like this one and told her that her parents weren't coming home. She remembered that night with terrible clarity, the way the officer's voice had shaken when he told her. The way the school counselor had held her while she screamed. The way everything after that had felt like a dream, a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. 14 months. It felt like 14 years. She pressed her face into the elephant's worn grey fur and breathed in deeply, searching for any trace of her mother's perfume. It had faded months ago, but Maya kept trying anyway. Sometimes, if she closed her eyes tight enough, she could almost smell it, almost hear her mother's voice, singing the lullaby she used to sing every night. The courthouse doors opened at the end of the hallway, and a man walked in. Maya didn't look up at first. She'd learned not to look at strangers, not to hope, not to let herself imagine that any of them might become family. But something made her lift her head. The man was tall, with broad shoulders and a military posture that reminded her of someone. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khaki pants, but there was something about the way he carried himself, alert, aware, like he was ready for anything. Like her father used to walk. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow, and his hair was cut short, peppered with grey at the temples. His eyes were the colour of the ocean on a cloudy day, grey-blue and deep. Maya's heart stopped. She knew those eyes. She knew that scar. She knew the way he walked, the set of his shoulders, the careful way he surveyed his surroundings. The box in her mind, the one she kept locked, the one full of memories too painful to touch, burst open. Uncle Jake, carrying her on his shoulders through the San Diego Zoo. Uncle Jake, teaching her to float in the pool while her father watched. Uncle Jake, sitting at their kitchen table on Christmas morning, laughing at one of her father's jokes. Her grip on the elephant tightened until her knuckles went white, and a sound escaped her throat, something between a gasp and a sob. The man was walking past her, heading toward the courtroom, when he heard it. He stopped, turned. His eyes found hers, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Maya was off the bench and running, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, the elephant falling forgotten behind her. "Uncle Jake!" she screamed. "Uncle Jake!" The man dropped to his knees just in time to catch her as she launched herself into his arms. Maya buried her face in his neck, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, her small body shaking with a grief and relief she couldn't begin to understand. "Maya?" The man's voice cracked. "Maya, oh my God! Maya!" He wrapped his arms around her and held on like she might disappear, his own shoulders trembling. He smelled like soap and coffee and something else, something that reminded her of her father, of safety, of home. "You came," Maya sobbed. "You came, you came, you came." "I'm here," Jacob whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm here, baby girl. I found you. I finally found you." Mrs. Patterson was on her feet, documents scattering. "Excuse me, sir, do you know this child?" But neither of them could answer. They were both crying too hard. Inside courtroom 4B, Judge Eleanor Martinez was reviewing the case file for the next hearing. A routine custody matter, she'd thought. An orphaned child, no living relatives found, being processed for permanent placement in the foster system. The child's name was Maya Rose Johnson, 8 years old. Both parents killed in a car accident 14 months ago. No grandparents living, no aunts or uncles identified. A tragic but unfortunately common case. Judge Martinez had been on the family court bench for 23 years. She'd seen thousands of children come through her courtroom, each one carrying their own particular heartbreak. She'd learned to maintain professional distance. She had to, or the job would destroy her. But something about this case file made her pause. The child's father, David Johnson, had been listed as a veteran. Navy. The details were sparse, but there was a note that he'd served multiple deployments before his honorable discharge. The door to her chambers opened, and her clerk appeared, looking flustered. "Judge Martinez, there's a situation in the hallway. The Johnson child. She's with a man who claims to know her. He's quite upset, they both are." Judge Martinez set down the file. "Bring them in. Let's sort this out." The scene that entered her courtroom a few minutes later was unlike anything she'd witnessed in her 2 decades on the bench. The child, Maya, was clinging to a tall man with military bearing, her arms wrapped around his neck, her face pressed into his shoulder. She was crying softly, her whole body curled into him like she was trying to disappear inside his protection. The man was carrying her like she weighed nothing, one arm supporting her back, the other cradling her head. His eyes were red-rimmed, and there were tear tracks on his weathered face. The social worker followed behind them, looking thoroughly confused and clutching a folder of papers. "Your Honor," Mrs. Patterson began, "I apologize for the disruption. This man approached my client in the hallway, and she seems to—" "She knows me," the man interrupted, his voice rough. "I'm her godfather. I was her father's best friend." He shifted Maya in his arms, and she whimpered, clutching tighter. "I've been looking for her for over a year." Judge Martinez studied him carefully. "Your name, sir?" "Jacob Reeves. Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, retired. I served with Maya's father in SEAL Team 7 for 12 years. The words hit Judge Martinez like a physical force. SEAL Team 7. She knew that name. Everyone in San Diego knew that name. "Please, sit down, Mr. Reeves." She gestured to the chairs before her bench. "Mrs. Patterson, you as well. Let's get to the bottom of this." Jacob Reeves lowered himself into the chair, but Maya wouldn't let go of him. He adjusted her on his lap, and she curled there like a small animal seeking shelter, her face still hidden against his chest. "Start from the beginning," Judge Martinez said. "How do you know this child?" Jacob took a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but his hands, resting protectively on Maya's back, were shaking. "I met David Johnson, Maya's father, on the first day of BUDS training in 2005, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, the hardest military training in the world. Out of our class of 162, only 23 of us graduated. David and I were 2 of them." He paused, swallowing hard. "We became more than teammates. We became brothers. We went through Hell Week together, through deployments together, through things I can't talk about because they're still classified. David saved my life at least 3 times. I saved his twice. That's what brothers do." Maya stirred in his arms, lifting her head slightly to look at him. "You gave me Ellie," she whispered. Jacob's face crumpled. "Yeah, baby girl. I gave you Ellie. For your first birthday. Do you still have her?" "She's in the hallway. I dropped her. We'll get her back, I promise." Judge Martinez felt something shift in her chest. She'd learned long ago to read people. It was an essential skill in family court, where everyone had something to hide, and the truth was often buried under layers of grief and anger and fear. This man was telling the truth. Every instinct she had confirmed it. "Continue, Mr. Reeves." Jacob nodded, his hand moving in slow circles on Maya's back. David met Sarah, Maya's mother, in 2012. She was a nurse at the VA hospital. He came in with a training injury, nothing serious, but serious enough to meet her. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "He called me that night, said he'd met the woman he was going to marry. I told him he was crazy. He said probably, but he was right anyway." He looked down at Maya, his expression softening. "They got married the next year. I was the best man. And when Maya was born in 2015, David asked me to be her godfather. He said," Jacob's voice broke. He took a moment to compose himself. "He said that if anything ever happened to him and Sarah, he wanted to know Maya would be taken care of, that she'd have someone who understood who her father was, what he did, why it mattered. He wanted her to know she came from warriors." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, if you were the child's godfather, why weren't you listed in the parents' documents? Why weren't you contacted when they passed away?" Pain flashed across Jacob's face. "I was deployed. My last deployment. I was overseas when David and Sarah died. I didn't find out until 3 weeks after the funeral. By then, Maya had already been placed in foster care, and no one knew how to reach me." He pulled a worn piece of paper from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. "This is the letter David gave me when Maya was born. It names me as her godfather and expresses his wishes for her care if anything happened to him and Sarah. But it's not a legal document. We never got around to the formal paperwork. We kept saying we would, but there was always another deployment, another mission, another reason to put it off." His jaw tightened. "We thought we had more time. You always think you have more time." Mrs. Patterson was frantically flipping through her files. "Your Honor, I have no record of any godfather, no record of any family friends. When we searched for relatives, we found nothing." "Because Jacob Reeves isn't his legal name," Jacob interrupted quietly. "At least, not in any database you would have searched. When you're in the teams, especially for certain missions, your identity gets complicated. I've been working for the past 14 months to cut through the red tape, to find out what happened to Maya, to figure out where she went. Do you have any idea how hard it is to navigate the foster care system when you can't even prove who you are through normal channels?" Judge Martinez held up her hand. "Mr. Reeves, I need to understand something. You said you were deployed when the Johnsons died. Where were you, and why did it take so long for you to find out?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Maya had fallen silent too, her breathing evening out as exhaustion overtook her. She was asleep, her small hand fisted in the fabric of his shirt. "I was on a classified mission," Jacob said finally. "I can't tell you where, and I can't tell you what we were doing. What I can tell you is that we were dark for 8 weeks. No communication with the outside world. When I came back," he shook his head, "when I came back, I found out my best friend was dead. His wife was dead. Their daughter had vanished into the system and no one could tell me where." He looked up at the judge, and she saw something in his eyes that she recognized. It was the same look she saw in the mirror sometimes. The weight of having seen too much, lost too much, carried too much. "I've spent the last 14 months fighting to get discharged from the Navy so I could focus on this full time. Fighting to get my identity sorted out through proper channels. Fighting to trace Maya through the foster care system. Do you know how many dead ends I hit? How many times I was told that the information was confidential, that I had no legal standing, that there was nothing I could do?" His voice hardened. "But I never stopped looking, not for one day, because I made a promise to her father, and I keep my promises." Judge Martinez looked at the sleeping child in his arms, at the way her small body had finally relaxed, at the peace on her face that probably hadn't been there in over a year. "Mrs. "Patterson," she said, "what's Maya's current placement status?" The social worker consulted her files, her hands not quite steady. "She's currently in a temporary foster home, Your Honor. It's her 4th placement. The previous 3 didn't work out." "Didn't work out how?" Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "Maya has had difficulty adjusting. She doesn't speak much. She has nightmares. She's withdrawn and unresponsive to the foster family's attempts to connect with her. The current family has indicated they're not able to provide the level of care she needs." Judge Martinez felt anger flicker in her chest. "So a traumatized child who lost both parents has been bounced between 4 homes in 14 months because no one could give her what she needed. The system is overwhelmed, Your Honor. We do the best we can with limited resources." "The system failed her," Jacob said, his voice low and dangerous. "She needed family. She needed someone who knew her, who loved her, who understood what she'd lost. Instead, she got strangers. 4 different sets of strangers in 14 months. Maya stirred at the change in his tone, making a small sound of distress. Immediately Jacob's voice softened, and he began murmuring to her, his hand returning to its gentle circles on her back. "It's okay, baby girl, I'm here. I've got you. You're safe now." Judge Martinez watched them for a long moment. Then she made a decision. "Mr. Reeves, I'm going to need verification of everything you've told me. Documentation of your service, your relationship with the Johnsons, your discharge status, your current living situation. I'm going to need background checks, home studies, references." Jacob nodded, unsurprised. "I have everything. I've spent the last year preparing for this moment. I have letters from my commanding officers, from other members of the teams who knew David and me. I have photographs, documents, everything I could gather. It's all in my car. I came here today for this exact purpose, to petition for custody. I didn't know Maya would be here. I thought I was just filing paperwork." He looked down at the child sleeping in his arms. "I didn't know I'd actually find her." Judge Martinez felt her throat tighten. 23 years on the bench, and this man and this child were breaking through her professional armor like it was made of paper. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "I'm ordering an emergency hearing for 1 week from today. In that time, I want every piece of documentation you have submitted to this court. I want a full background check completed. I want a home study initiated, and I want to speak to anyone who can corroborate your relationship with the Johnsons." She paused. "In the meantime, I'm ordering temporary supervised visitation between Mr. Reeves and Maya, 2 hours a day, at a location approved by Child Protective Services, with a social worker present." Jacob's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I haven't made any final decisions. I'm doing my due diligence to ensure this child's safety and well-being. That's my only priority." "I understand, and I'm grateful. That's all I'm asking for, a chance to prove that I'm who I say I am, that I can give Maya the home she deserves." Maya chose that moment to wake up. She lifted her head, blinking sleepily, and looked around the courtroom in confusion. Then her eyes found Jacob's face, and she smiled. A real smile, the first one Mrs. Patterson had seen from her in 14 months of casework. "Uncle Jake," her voice was small and drowsy, "is this a dream?" Jacob's composure finally broke completely. Tears streamed down his face as he pressed a kiss to her forehead. "No, baby girl, it's not a dream. I'm really here, and I'm never leaving you again." Judge Martinez had to look away. She pretended to study the papers on her desk, giving herself a moment to compose herself. 23 years. She thought she'd seen it all. She thought she'd built walls thick enough to keep the emotions out. She was wrong. When she looked up again, her voice was steady, but something had changed in her eyes. "This court is adjourned until next week. Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Patterson, I suggest you use the time wisely." The week that followed was the longest of Jacob Reeves's life, and also the most hopeful. He threw himself into the documentation process with the same intensity he'd brought to every mission in his 20-year career. He gathered letters from 15 different people who had known him and David, commanding officers, fellow SEALs, neighbors, David's parents before they passed, Sarah's colleagues at the VA hospital. He compiled photographs spanning 2 decades. Him and David in Bud's training, covered in mud and grinning like idiots, their graduation ceremony. Deployment photos, carefully redacted to remove classified elements. David and Sarah's wedding, where Jacob stood at his brother's side. The hospital room where he'd held newborn Maya for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. There was one photo in particular that Jacob kept coming back to. It was taken the day Maya was baptized, just a few months after she was born. David was holding her, Sarah standing beside him, and Jacob was in the background, his hand on David's shoulder. They were all smiling, the kind of smiles that come from deep happiness, from knowing that life, despite all its difficulties, had given them something precious. Jacob had been the one to choose Maya's godparent gift, a small gold cross on a delicate chain. Sarah had cried when she saw it. David had pulled him into a bear hug and whispered, "Thank you, brother, for everything." He obtained his service record, his honorable discharge papers, his medical history, his psychological evaluation. He submitted to a background check that was more thorough than anything he'd undergone, even in the military. He opened his home to the social worker who came to conduct the preliminary home study, answering every question with complete honesty. The house was a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood near the ocean. He'd bought it 6 months ago, after his discharge, specifically because he'd been planning for this moment. 1 bedroom for him, 1 for Maya. One that he'd turned into a home office but could easily become a playroom. There was a backyard with a swing set he'd assembled himself, imagining Maya's laughter. There was a room painted soft lavender because someone at one of the foster homes had told him it was Maya's favorite color. There was a bookshelf filled with children's books he'd ordered based on recommendations from parenting websites he'd studied with the same dedication he'd once devoted to mission briefings. He'd also stocked the pantry with foods he remembered Maya loving. Peanut butter, apple slices, the specific brand of mac and cheese that Sarah used to make. He'd found Maya's favorite cereal, the one with the cartoon rabbit on the box. He'd bought the shampoo that smelled like strawberries, the kind Sarah always used for Maya's hair. Every detail mattered. Every choice was made with Maya in mind. The social worker, a woman named Jennifer Chen, looked around his home with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You've prepared for this," she said. "Yes, ma'am, for 14 months. Some people would call that obsessive." Jacob met her eyes steadily. "Some people don't understand what it means to make a promise to a dying man." Jennifer's expression softened. "David Johnson knew he might not come home. Every time we deployed, we knew we might not come home. That's the job." But about 6 months before the accident, David started talking more about it, about Maya, about what would happen if both he and Sarah were gone. "I think—" Jacob paused, searching for the right words. "I think he had a feeling. Some of the guys get that, near the end of their service, a sense that their luck is running out. And he asked you to take care of Maya? He made me promise. Not just to take care of her, to raise her, to teach her about him, about where she came from, to make sure she knew her father was a hero." Jacob's voice roughened. "I keep my promises, Mrs. Chen. I've never broken one in my life." Jennifer wrote something in her notebook. "Tell me about your relationship with Maya, before the accident." Jacob leaned back, letting the memories wash over him. "I was there when she was born. David called me at 3 a.m., freaking out because Sarah was in labor and he couldn't find his car keys. I drove them to the hospital myself, stayed in the waiting room for 12 hours until she arrived." He smiled at the memory. "The first time I held her, she was so small, like nothing, like she might break if I breathed wrong. David was standing there watching me, and he had this look on his face, terror and joy and wonder all mixed together. He said, 'Jake, I have no idea what I'm doing. How do I keep something this tiny alive?' What did you tell him?" "I told him he'd figure it out, that he was the best man I knew, and if anyone could be a great father, it was him. Jacob's voice caught. He was too. A great father. Every time I visited, he was so present with her, playing, reading, just being there. He never missed a moment he didn't have to miss. And how often did you visit? As often as I could. Every leave, every break between deployments. I was there for her first birthday, her second, her third. I taught her to swim when she was 4. David was there too, but he wanted me to do it. He said I had more patience. Jacob laughed softly. He was probably right. David was a lot of things, but patient wasn't one of them. He was always moving, always pushing, always ready for the next challenge. It made him a great SEAL, but Maya needed someone who could slow down, and that was me. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, her pen still moving across the page. Mr. Reeves, I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen a lot of custody cases, a lot of people who claim to love children they barely know. What I'm seeing here, this is different. Different how? You actually know her. You know what shampoo she likes, what food she eats, what color she wants her room painted. You didn't just promise to be her godfather. You actually were her godfather. You were present in her life. I tried to be. It wasn't always easy with the deployments. But David sent pictures, videos, updates. We talked on the phone whenever we could. And when I was stateside, I spent as much time with them as possible. He looked around the room, at the evidence of all his preparation. When I found out they were gone, I can't describe what that felt like. It was like losing part of myself. But the thing that kept me going, the thing that got me through, was knowing Maya was out there somewhere, alone, scared, waiting for someone to come find her. His jaw tightened. I wasn't going to let her down, no matter what it took. Jennifer nodded slowly. The preliminary home study is favorable. I'll submit my report to Judge Martinez before the hearing. And the visitation? You've done well. Maya is clearly comfortable with you. More comfortable than she's been with anyone since her parents' death. That counts for a lot. Jacob thought about the past week of visits, 2 hours a day at a supervised visitation center, with Jennifer or another social worker always present. Maya had been shy at first, unsure if this was real, if he would stay. But by the 3rd visit she was climbing into his lap the moment he walked through the door. By the 5th she was talking, really talking, telling him about her days, her dreams, her fears. On the 2nd day of visitation, Maya had asked him about her father, not the big stories. She'd heard those before, snippets from relatives at the funeral, mentions from family friends. She wanted the small things, what his favorite food was, what made him laugh, how he liked his coffee. Jacob had told her everything he could remember. David's obsession with terrible action movies, the way he hummed under his breath when he was concentrating. His inability to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. The proud way he talked about Sarah, even years after they'd married, like he couldn't believe his luck. He used to call your mum his sunshine, Jacob told Maya. Said she lit up every room she walked into. Maya had been quiet for a moment. Then she'd said, she did. She was really bright, like actual sunshine. That's where you get it from, Jacob said. You've got her light. Maya had started crying then, and Jacob had held her, letting her sob against his chest until she was empty. It was the most she'd cried in over a year, according to Mrs. Patterson. All that grief, finally finding a way out. She told him about the foster homes, about the first family who had too many kids and not enough attention, about the second family who got frustrated when she cried at night, about the third family who gave up after 2 months because she wouldn't talk to them, about the fourth family where she'd been when Jacob found her kind enough but strangers. They didn't understand, Maya had said, her small voice matter-of-fact. They wanted me to be happy, but I couldn't be happy. Mommy and Daddy were gone. Jacob had held her close, his heart breaking and mending at the same time. You don't have to be happy all the time, he'd told her. You just have to be you, and I'll be here no matter what. Promise? Promise. SEAL's honor. She'd smiled at that. Really smiled. And she'd said something that nearly destroyed him. Daddy used to say SEAL's honor too. Now, standing in his living room as Jennifer Chen finished her notes, Jacob allowed himself to hope. For the first time in 14 months, he allowed himself to believe that this might actually work out. "Mr. Reeves," Jennifer said as she prepared to leave, "can I ask you something off the record?" "Of course." "Why did you leave the Navy? You were a Master Chief. You could have served another 10 years, made officer if you wanted. Why walk away?" Jacob considered the question. He'd been asked it before, by his commanding officer, by his teammates, by the Navy psychiatrist who'd had to sign off on his discharge. "Because David asked me to," he said simply. "The night before his last deployment with the teams. This was before he retired, before he and Sarah got pregnant. We were having beers at his place. He looked at me and said, 'Jake, if I die over there, I need you to promise me something. Don't let the job consume you. Don't let it take everything. Get out. Live. And if Sarah and I have kids someday and something happens to us, be their father. Not their SEAL godfather who's always deployed. Their father.'" Jacob's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. "I said yes. Because he was my brother, and you don't say no to your brother. And then he didn't die over there. He retired, got married, had Maya, lived a good life for a few years. And I thought maybe I'd never have to keep that promise. Maybe the universe would be kind for once." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The universe wasn't kind. David and Sarah died on a rainy Tuesday night, driving home from a date night, hit by a drunk driver who walked away without a scratch. And I was on the other side of the world, doing a job that suddenly didn't matter at all. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "For what it's worth," she said finally, "I think David chose well." The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Friday. Jacob arrived at 8:30, wearing a suit he'd bought specifically for this occasion. He'd shined his shoes until they gleamed, trimmed his hair, shaved carefully. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent his life in service, who understood the importance of showing respect. Maya was already in the courtroom when he entered, sitting with Mrs. Patterson at a table near the front. She was wearing a blue dress with white flowers, her mother's favorite colors, he remembered Sarah telling him once. The moment she saw him, her face lit up. She started to rise from her seat, then remembered where she was, and settled for an excited wave. Jacob smiled at her, his heart full, and took his seat at the opposite table. Judge Martinez entered precisely at 10, her black robe swishing as she settled into her chair. Her face was neutral, professional, but Jacob thought he saw something in her eyes when she looked at Maya, a softness that hadn't been there a week ago. "This hearing will come to order," she said. "We are here to address the matter of permanent custody for Maya Rose Johnson, a minor child currently in the temporary care of the state of California. Mr. Jacob Reeves has petitioned for permanent custody as the child's godfather and the designated guardian according to the verbal wishes of her deceased parents." She looked at Mrs. Patterson. "Mrs. Patterson, you've had a week to investigate Mr. Reeves's claims. What are your findings?" The social worker stood, her file clutched to her chest. "Your Honor, I've conducted a thorough investigation into Mr. Reeves's background and his relationship with the Johnson family. I've spoken with 17 individuals who knew Mr. Reeves and Mr. Johnson during their service together. All of them confirm that the two men had an exceptionally close bond, described consistently as brothers rather than simply friends or colleagues." She flipped through her papers. "I've verified Mr. Reeves's military service record, which is exemplary. 20 years in the Navy, the last 15 as a member of SEAL Team 7. Multiple commendations, no disciplinary issues. His discharge was honorable, granted at his own request 6 months ago." "Did he give a reason for the request?" "Yes, Your Honor. He stated that he needed to focus on personal matters, specifically finding Maya Johnson and fulfilling his promise to her father." A murmur went through the small courtroom. Just a few observers, a court reporter, a bailiff. Judge Martinez silenced it with a look. Continue. "I've also conducted a preliminary home study. Mr. Reeves purchased a home 6 months ago in a quiet residential neighborhood. It's clean, safe, age-appropriate for a child. He's prepared a bedroom specifically for Maya, stocked with clothing, books, and toys appropriate for her age, Mrs. Patterson paused, and something shifted in her expression, something that looked almost like wonder. Your Honor, I've been a social worker for 18 years. I've seen a lot of people petition for custody of children for a lot of reasons. Some good, some bad, some indifferent. But I have never seen someone prepare as thoroughly, as thoughtfully, or as lovingly as Mr. Reeves has prepared to become this child's father. Jacob felt his throat tighten. Additionally, Mrs. Patterson continued, I've observed the supervised visitations between Mr. Reeves and Maya over the past week. The child's response to him is remarkable. She speaks more in his presence than she has in 14 months of casework. She smiles. She laughs. She seeks physical comfort from him without hesitation. She looked at Judge Martinez directly. Your Honor, in my professional opinion, Mr. Reeves is exactly who he claims to be, a man who loved Maya's parents, who promised to care for their child, and who has spent over a year fighting to keep that promise. I believe placing Maya in his permanent custody would be in her best interest. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. She turned to Jacob. Mr. Reeves, would you like to make a statement? Jacob stood, his hands steady, even though his heart was racing. He'd prepared a speech, rehearsed it a dozen times. But looking at Maya, at her hopeful face, at the way she was clutching Ellie the elephant he'd given her 8 years ago, the prepared words vanished. Your Honor, he said, I'm not good with words. I've spent most of my life in situations where actions mattered more than speeches, so I'm just going to tell you the truth, as simply as I can. He took a breath. David Johnson was my brother. Not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice, by commitment, by a bond forged in the hardest circumstances you can imagine. We went through things together that I can't describe, things that changed us both forever, and when we came out the other side, we knew that we would always be there for each other. Always. His eyes found Maya's. When David asked me to be Maya's godfather, it was the greatest honor of my life. Greater than any medal, any commendation, any recognition I've ever received, because he was trusting me with the thing he loved most in the world, his daughter. Jacob's voice strengthened. I failed him once. I was overseas when he died, when Maya needed me most. I wasn't there. That's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. He turned to face Judge Martinez fully. I know I can't replace her parents. I'm not trying to. But I can love her. I can protect her. I can tell her stories about her father, about how brave he was, how kind, how funny. I can teach her the things he would have taught her. I can give her a home, a family, a future. He paused. Your Honor, I'm not asking for custody because I think I deserve it. I'm asking because Maya deserves it. She deserves to be with someone who loves her, who knew her parents, who can keep their memory alive. She deserves to stop being bounced between strangers. She deserves stability. She deserves a home. He sat down, his piece said. Judge Martinez was silent for a long moment. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped down from the bench, something she almost never did during a hearing, and walked to where Maya was sitting. Maya, she said gently, crouching down to the child's eye level. May I talk to you for a minute? Maya nodded, her eyes wide. Do you understand what's happening here today? What we're deciding? Yes, Maya said softly. You're deciding if I can live with Uncle Jake. That's right. And I want to ask you something very important. I want you to tell me the truth, even if you think it might not be what I want to hear, okay? Okay. Judge Martinez took a breath. Do you want to live with Mr. Reeves? Maya didn't hesitate. Yes. Can you tell me why? Maya looked at the elephant in her lap, then at Jacob, then back at the judge. When she spoke, her voice was clearer and stronger than anyone in the room had ever heard it. Because he knew my daddy. Because he tells me stories about him, about when they were friends, about the brave things Daddy did. Because he gave me Ellie when I was a baby, and Mommy said that meant he would always be my special person. Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept going. Because when I'm with him, I don't feel so sad. I still miss Mommy and Daddy, and that never goes away. But when Uncle Jake holds me, I feel safe. Like Daddy's still taking care of me, just through him. She looked at Jacob, her expression fierce in a way that reminded everyone in the room of the warrior she'd descended from. He promised he wouldn't leave me, and Mommy told me that when Uncle Jake makes a promise, he keeps it, always. Judge Martinez straightened up slowly. Her face was composed, professional, but there were tears glistening in her eyes that she didn't try to hide. "Thank you, Maya," she said. "That was very brave of you." She returned to the bench, her steps measured. She sat down, folded her hands in front of her, and looked out at the courtroom. "In my 23 years as a family court judge," she began, her voice slightly rough, "I have heard thousands of custody cases. I have had to make decisions that affect the entire trajectory of children's lives, often with imperfect information and no good options." She paused. "This case is different. This case has reminded me why I do this job, why I've devoted my career to family law, despite the heartbreak, despite the impossible choices, despite the nights I go home and wonder if I made the right call." Her eyes moved between Jacob and Maya. "What I've seen here today is not a complicated legal matter. It's a love story. A story of a promise made between brothers, and the extraordinary lengths one man has gone to keep that promise. A story of a child who has lost everything, finding her way back to someone who represents home." Judge Martinez picked up her gavel. "After reviewing all evidence presented, after considering the home study, the background check, the character witnesses, the professional assessment of the social worker, and most importantly, the expressed wishes of the child herself, I am ruling in favor of permanent custody being granted to Jacob Reeves." Maya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Furthermore," Judge Martinez continued, "I am waiving the standard waiting period for permanent placement, given the unique circumstances of this case, the verified relationship between Mr. Reeves and the child's parents, the child's clear preference, and the extended period she has already spent in the foster system. I see no benefit in prolonging the transition." She looked at Jacob, and for the first time she smiled. "Mr. Reeves, Maya can go home with you today." The sound that escaped Maya was half sob, half scream. She launched herself from her chair and ran to Jacob, who caught her and lifted her into his arms, holding her so tight it seemed like he was trying to absorb all 14 months of her pain and fear and loneliness. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you, baby girl, I've got you." Judge Martinez watched them for a moment, her own composure cracking. 23 years, and she'd never cried on the bench. She'd come close a few times, but she'd always held it together. Not today. Today, tears streamed freely down her face as she watched a broken family begin to heal. "This court," she said, her voice thick, "is adjourned." The house was quiet except for the sound of the ocean in the distance. Jacob stood in the doorway of Maya's new bedroom, watching her sleep. She was curled around Ellie the elephant, her breathing slow and steady, her face peaceful in a way he hadn't seen since she was a baby. It had been 12 hours since the hearing, 12 hours since he'd buckled Maya into the back seat of his truck and driven her home, really home, for the first time in 14 months. 12 hours since she'd walked through the front door, seen the lavender walls and the books and the swing set in the backyard, and started crying so hard she couldn't speak. "Daddy would have loved this," she'd finally managed to say. "Mommy too." "I know," Jacob had told her. "I thought about them a lot when I was setting it up. I tried to imagine what they would have wanted for you." Now it was almost midnight and Maya was asleep, and Jacob was standing in her doorway, trying to wrap his head around the fact that his life had just changed completely. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo he kept as his lock screen. It was from David and Sarah's wedding, the three of them together, David in his dress whites, Sarah in her white gown, Jacob in his own uniform with a flower pinned to his chest. "I did it, brother," he whispered. "I found her. She's safe. She's home." He imagined he could hear David's voice, that familiar drawl that had carried him through so many impossible situations. "Took you long enough, Jake. What was the hold-up?" Jacob laughed softly, tears streaming down his face. "You know me. Always had to do things the hard way." He looked at Maya one more time, then gently closed the door and walked to his own room. Tomorrow, there would be paperwork. Legal proceedings, the long process of officially adopting Maya. There would be school to arrange, a pediatrician to find, 1,000 details to figure out. But tonight, there was just this. A child sleeping safely in her own room, a promise kept, a family, broken and reformed, beginning again. Jacob Reeves, former Navy SEAL warrior hero, lay down on his bed and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. He cried for David and Sarah, who should be here. He cried for Maya, who had lost so much. He cried for himself, for the 14 months of searching and hoping and fearing. And then, finally, he slept. The first weeks were not easy. Maya had nightmares almost every night, waking up screaming for parents who would never come. Jacob learned to sleep lightly, to be at her door within seconds of the first cry, to hold her while she sobbed and reassure her that she was safe, that he wasn't going anywhere, that she would never be alone again. The first nightmare came on her second night home. Jacob heard her scream from down the hall, a sound that cut through him like a knife. He was out of bed and running before he was fully awake, his SEAL training kicking in, adrenaline flooding his system. He found Maya sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, clutching Ellie the elephant so hard her knuckles were white. "Mommy!" she was crying. "Mommy, come back! Please come back!" Jacob sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her into his arms. She fought at first, still half asleep, still trapped in the nightmare. Then she realized it was him, and she collapsed against his chest, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "I was dreaming about the car," she gasped. "The crash. I saw it happening. I saw the lights coming, and I tried to warn them, but they couldn't hear me." "Shh," Jacob murmured, stroking her hair. "It's okay. It was just a dream. You're safe." "But it happened," Maya said. "It really happened. They really died." Jacob closed his eyes against the pain. What could he say? There was no comfort for this, no words that would make it better. The truth was brutal and unforgiving. Her parents were gone, and they were never coming back. "Yes," he said finally, "it really happened. And I'm so sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry." Maya cried herself out in his arms, and Jacob held her, rocking slightly, humming a song that David used to sing to her when she was tiny. An old Navy hymn, slow and mournful and strangely comforting. When she finally fell asleep again, Jacob didn't leave. He sat in the chair by her window, watching over her, ready to be there if the nightmares came back. They did come back, night after night, for weeks. Sometimes it was the car crash. Sometimes it was being taken away by the social workers. Sometimes it was the foster homes, strangers' faces, unfamiliar rooms, the constant feeling of not belonging anywhere. Jacob learned her patterns. He learned which dreams made her scream and which made her cry quietly into her pillow. He learned that she slept better with a nightlight, worse when it rained, and not at all when there was thunder. He learned to make chamomile tea at 2 a.m., to read stories until his voice went hoarse, to simply sit beside her in the darkness until the fear passed. He learned that sometimes she needed to talk about her parents, and sometimes she needed to not talk about anything at all. During the day, she was quiet, watchful, still getting used to the idea that this was permanent. She would sometimes stop in the middle of playing or eating or watching TV and look at Jacob with an expression of disbelief, like she was waiting for someone to tell her it was all a mistake. She tested him in small ways at first. She would refuse to eat dinner, watching to see if he would get angry. He didn't. He just offered her something else, or let her go hungry if she preferred, and made sure breakfast was her favorite the next morning. She would ignore him when he spoke to her, pretending not to hear. He would wait patiently, then ask again, never raising his voice, never showing frustration. She would say things designed to push him away. "You're not my real dad. I don't have to listen to you. I wish you'd never found me." That last one hurt more than Jacob would ever admit. But he understood what it meant. She was testing the boundaries, seeing if his love was conditional, waiting for him to abandon her like everyone else had. He never did. "You're right," he told her, after one particularly difficult afternoon. "I'm not your real dad. David was your real dad, and he was the best father I've ever known. But I love you anyway. And I'm not going anywhere, no matter what you say or do. You're stuck with me." Maya had stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she'd thrown herself into his arms and cried. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tests became less frequent. The walls she'd built started to come down. She began to trust. "Uncle Jake," she asked one afternoon, about 2 weeks after she'd come home, "what if you die too?" Jacob set down the sandwich he'd been making and gave her his full attention. "That's a really good question," he said. "And I'm not going to lie to you, Maya. I can't promise I'll never die. Nobody can promise that. What I can promise is that I'm going to do everything in my power to be here for you for as long as I possibly can." Maya considered this. What if something happens anyway? Then there are people who will take care of you. Mrs. Chen knows all about our situation. So does Judge Martinez. And I'm going to make sure there are legal documents that say exactly what should happen to you if I'm not around. You won't disappear into the system again. I won't let that happen. You promise? Seal's honor. Maya nodded slowly. Then she said something that broke Jacob's heart and filled it at the same time. "I'm glad you're my person now, Uncle Jake. I think Daddy would be happy." Jacob knelt down so he was at her eye level. "Your daddy would be proud of you, Maya, for being so brave, for surviving, for letting yourself love someone new even when you were scared." "I was really scared," Maya admitted. "When I saw you in the courthouse, I thought maybe I was imagining it. I thought the same thing when I saw you. I'd been looking for so long, and then suddenly there you were. Why did you look for so long? Because I loved your daddy. Because I love you. Because some things are worth fighting for, no matter how hard they are." Maya threw her arms around his neck, and Jacob held her close, feeling the rapid beat of her small heart against his chest. "I love you too, Uncle Jake." It was the first time she'd said it. Jacob closed his eyes and let the words wash over him. "I love you too, baby girl. To the moon and back." Maya pulled back, her eyes bright. "That's what Mommy used to say." "I know. She got it from me. I said it to her at the wedding and she adopted it." Maya smiled. A real smile, one that reached her eyes. "Tell me about the wedding. You were Daddy's best man, right?" "I was. Did I ever tell you about the speech I gave?" "No! Tell me!" Jacob sat down on the kitchen floor, right there, and Maya climbed into his lap. He started talking about the wedding, about the speech he'd prepared that had made everyone laugh and cry, about the way David had looked at Sarah like she was the only person in the world. "I started by talking about how I met your daddy," Jacob said. "About Bud-S training, about Hell Week, about all the crazy things we went through together. I told the story about the time he saved my life in training. We were doing surf passage, and I got caught in a riptide, and David swam out and pulled me to shore. He always said it was nothing, but I knew better." "Then what?" "Then I talked about meeting your mum. How David called me after their first date and said, 'Jake, I met the one,' and I laughed at him, because David said that about every girl he dated. But this time was different. This time, when I met Sarah, I understood." What was different? Jacob thought for a moment. The way they looked at each other like they were the only two people in the room, like everything else just faded away. "Your daddy was a tough guy, toughest I ever knew, but around your mum he was soft, gentle, like all the hard edges smoothed out." Maya was quiet. drinking in every word. "What did you say at the end of the speech?" "I said that David was my brother, not by blood but by choice, and that Sarah wasn't just marrying him, she was joining our family. I told them that whatever happened, wherever life took them, they would always have me in their corner. Always." He paused, his voice thickening. "And I told them that I couldn't wait to meet their kids someday, to be the cool uncle who taught them to swim and sneak them candy and told them embarrassing stories about their father." Maya laughed. "You do tell embarrassing stories about Daddy. That's my job. It's in the Godfather handbook." "There's a handbook?" "Absolutely. Very official. Section 7, paragraph 3. The Godfather shall embarrass the child's parents at every available opportunity." Maya giggled, and the sound was like music to Jacob's ears. And Maya listened, drinking in every word, every detail, every memory of the parents she'd lost. She was building them back, piece by piece, through Jacob's stories, keeping them alive in the only way she could. It was exactly what David had asked him to do. Months passed. The nightmares gradually became less frequent. Maya started school and made friends, though she still preferred Jacob's company to anyone else's. She joined a soccer team and discovered she had her father's competitive streak. She started sleeping through the night more often than not. Jacob threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he'd brought to being a SEAL. He learned to braid hair by watching YouTube tutorials. He memorized the names of all Maya's classmates, their parents, their allergies and food preferences, so he could navigate playdates and birthday parties. He coached her soccer team, becoming the most involved parent on the field. He also started therapy, something he probably should have done years ago. The psychologist, a former military spouse who specialized in treating veterans, helped him process not just the grief of losing David and Sarah, but the accumulated trauma of 2 decades of service. "You're not just building a life for Maya," she told him during one session. "You're building a life for yourself, for the first time, maybe ever." She was right. For 20 years, Jacob's identity had been wrapped up in being a SEAL. It was all he knew, all he was. The transition to civilian life, to fatherhood, to domesticity, it required a complete reconstruction of who he was and what his life meant. There were days when he felt completely lost. Days when the simplest parenting decisions, what to make for dinner, whether to let Maya have extra screen time, how to handle a playground argument, felt more overwhelming than any combat mission he'd ever faced. In combat, the rules were clear. You had objectives, protocols, training. You knew who the enemy was and what you had to do. Parenting was nothing like that. Every day brought new challenges, new questions, new moments where he had to make split-second decisions with no briefing and no backup. But slowly, he found his footing. He learned that sometimes the best thing to do was nothing. Just sit with Maya, let her talk or not talk, be present without trying to fix anything. He learned that bedtime routines mattered more than he'd ever imagined, that consistency was a form of love, that showing up day after day was its own kind of heroism. He also learned to accept help. The other SEAL families in the area rallied around them, bringing meals, offering to watch Maya so Jacob could run errands or just take a breath. David's old teammates came by regularly, telling Maya stories about her father, keeping his memory alive in ways that mattered. One teammate in particular, a man named Marcus, who had served with David on his last deployment, became a regular fixture in their lives. He would take Maya to the zoo, teach her to skateboard, do all the uncle things that Jacob sometimes didn't have energy for. "You're not alone in this," Marcus told Jacob one evening after Maya had gone to bed. "The brotherhood doesn't end just because we take off the uniform. David would have done the same for any of us. We're just returning the favor." Jacob had to turn away to hide his tears. But every time he doubted himself, every time he wondered if he was equipped for this, Maya would look at him with her father's eyes and smile her mother's smile, and he would remember why he was doing this. For David, for Sarah, for the promise he'd made, for love. 6 months after Maya came home, Jacob enrolled her in a children's grief support group. It met once a week at a community center near their house, led by a therapist who specialized in helping kids process loss. Maya was resistant at first. "I don't want to talk about my feelings with a bunch of strangers," she said, crossing her arms. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," Jacob told her. "You can just listen. But these are other kids who've lost parents too. Kids who understand what you're going through. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone." The first few sessions, Maya sat in the corner with her arms crossed, refusing to participate. But slowly, as she listened to other children share their stories, something shifted. She realized that her pain, while unique to her, was also part of something larger, a shared human experience of loss and grief and the long road back to happiness. By the 3rd month, Maya was one of the most active participants in the group. She helped younger kids feel welcome, shared her own strategies for dealing with hard days, became a leader in her own quiet way. "You've got a special kid there," the therapist told Jacob after one session. "She's not just surviving, she's thriving, and she's helping other kids do the same." Jacob felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly knocked him over. "She gets it from her parents," he said. "Both of them were like that. Always helping others, always looking out for the people around them." "She gets it from you too," the therapist said gently. "Don't sell yourself short. You've given her something no one else could. A safe place to fall apart and put herself back together." 1 year after the custody hearing, Judge Eleanor Martinez received an envelope in her chambers. It was hand-addressed, with a return address she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully, curious. Inside was a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed a man and a little girl at the beach. The man was Jacob Reeves, looking more relaxed and happy than she'd ever seen him. The girl, Maya, was laughing, her head thrown back, sand in her hair and joy radiating from every inch of her small frame. Behind them, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The letter read, "Dear Judge Martinez, 1 year ago today you gave me back my life. I know you were just doing your job. I know you followed the evidence, reviewed the documentation, made the decision you thought was best for Maya. That's what judges do. But I want you to know that what happened in your courtroom that day was more than a legal proceeding. It was a miracle. Maya is thriving. She's at the top of her class. She plays soccer like her father used to, fiercely, joyfully, leaving everything on the field. She still has hard days. Days when she misses her parents so much it physically hurts, but the hard days are getting further apart and the good days are getting better. She asked me to tell you something. She said, "Tell the judge lady, thank you for giving me back my family. Tell her that I'm happy now. I'm enclosing a photo from our trip to the beach last weekend. It's her favorite place. She says the ocean sounds like her daddy's voice if you listen close enough. I don't know what she means by that, but I believe her. Thank you, Your Honor, not just for the ruling, but for seeing us, for believing us, for crying with us. You changed our lives. We will never forget you. With gratitude, Jacob Reeves, P.S." Maya wanted me to add that she got an A on her book report about courage. She wrote about you. Judge Martinez read the letter 3 times. Then she propped the photograph against the lamp on her desk, where she could see it every day. She had been on the bench for 24 years now. She would probably serve another 10 before she retired. In that time, she would hear thousands more cases, make thousands more decisions that affected children's lives. But she knew with absolute certainty that she would never forget Maya Johnson and Jacob Reeves. They had reminded her of something essential, something she needed to remember every time she put on her robe and sat behind the bench. That sometimes, despite all the brokenness in the world, despite the cruelty and the tragedy and the endless parade of human suffering, sometimes love wins. Sometimes families find their way back to each other. Sometimes promises are kept. She looked at the photograph one more time, at the laughing child and the man who had moved heaven and earth to find her, and smiled through her tears. Another year passed. Maya was 10 now, tall for her age, with her mother's graceful movements and her father's stubborn streak. She had a best friend named Sophie, a passion for marine biology, and a growing collection of seashells that lined the windowsill in her room. She still slept with Ellie the elephant every night. She still talked to her parents sometimes, late at night, telling them about her day, asking for their advice, imagining their answers. She still had moments of grief that hit her like waves, sudden and overwhelming. But she had learned to ride those waves, to let them wash over her and then recede, leaving her standing, still here, still breathing. School had become a place of joy rather than anxiety. Maya had found her tribe, a small group of girls who loved the ocean as much as she did, who spent weekends exploring tide pools and building sandcastles and dreaming of becoming marine biologists together. Her teachers consistently praised her resilience, her compassion, her natural leadership. She was the kid who noticed when someone was sitting alone at lunch and invited them to join her table. The kid who stood up against bullying, not with fists, but with words, with empathy, with the quiet authority of someone who had learned that kindness was stronger than cruelty. "She reminds me of her father," Marcus told Jacob one day, watching Maya organize a beach cleanup with her friends. "Same stubborn determination, same big heart. David would be going crazy with pride right now." Jacob nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Jacob had officially adopted her 6 months after the custody hearing. Maya had insisted on a ceremony, something to mark the occasion, so they'd had a small gathering at their house. Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Patterson, Jake's former teammates from the SEALs, Maya's soccer coach, a few families from school. "Do I have to call you Dad now?" Maya had asked, as they stood before a judge. Not Judge Martinez, unfortunately. She'd been invited but had another hearing that day. "You can call me whatever feels right," Jacob had said. "Uncle Jake, Dad, hey you, whatever works." Maya had thought about it for a long moment. "I think I want to call you Dad, but not because I forgot my real dad, because you're my dad too now. I can have 2 dads, right? One in heaven and one here?" Jacob had had to take several deep breaths before he could respond. "Yeah, baby girl. You can definitely have 2 dads." Now, 2 years after that day in the courthouse, they were sitting on the beach, watching the sunset. It was their Friday tradition, dinner from the taco truck, then the beach, then home for a movie. "Dad," Maya said, using the name she'd gradually grown comfortable with over the past 18 months. "Yeah? Do you think you'll ever get married?" Jacob blinked, surprised by the question. "I don't know. Why do you ask?" Maya shrugged, drawing patterns in the sand with a stick. "Sophie's mom got remarried last year. Sophie says it's weird sometimes, but also nice. She has more people who love her now. And you're wondering if you'd have more people who love you too?" Maya nodded. Jacob was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer honestly. "The truth is, I haven't really thought about it. For the past 2 years, you've been my whole focus. Building our family, making sure you're okay, figuring out how to be a good dad. I haven't had room for much else." "But you could," Maya said. "I'm okay now. I mean, I'm not perfect, but I'm good. You could have room for other stuff too. Would that bother you, if I dated someone?" Maya considered the question seriously. She did that a lot, took time to really think before answering. It was one of the things Jacob loved about her. "I don't think so," she said finally, "as long as they were nice, and as long as you didn't forget about me." "I could never forget about you," Jacob said. "You're my daughter. Nothing could ever change that." "I know." Maya smiled at him. "I'm just saying, it's okay if you want to be happy too. You don't have to be sad or alone just because you're taking care of me. Daddy wouldn't have wanted that." Jacob felt his heart clench. This kid, this incredible, resilient, wise beyond her years kid, never stopped amazing him. "Your daddy would be so proud of you," he said, his voice rough. "I know. I'm pretty great." She grinned at him and he laughed, grabbing her and tickling her until she shrieked. They walked home as the stars came out, hand in hand, talking about nothing and everything. When they got to the house, Maya paused at the door. "Dad?" "Yeah? Thank you. For coming to find me. For not giving up." Jacob knelt down so he was at her eye level. She was tall now, but he still did this for the important moments. "I made a promise," he said simply. "I know, but you could have broken it. A lot of people would have. It was really hard what you did, looking for me for so long." "I would have looked forever," Jacob said. "I would have never stopped. That's what love is, Maya. It doesn't give up." Maya threw her arms around him, and he held her close, this child who had lost so much and still somehow found the strength to love again. "I'm glad you're my dad," she whispered. "I'm glad you're my daughter." They went inside, and Maya ran ahead to pick out a movie while Jacob lingered in the entryway. On the wall by the door, there was a photograph. The three of them at David and Sarah's wedding, frozen in time, forever young and whole and happy. Jacob touched the frame gently. "I've got her, brother," he said softly. "She's safe. She's happy. She's going to be okay." He could have sworn he felt a hand on his shoulder, heard a familiar voice in his ear. "I know you do, Jake. I always knew you would." Jacob smiled, wiped his eyes, and went to join his daughter in the living room. The movie that night was Finding Nemo, Maya's choice. "It's about a dad who never gives up," she explained, settling into her corner of the couch with a bowl of popcorn. "He crosses the whole ocean to find his son, even when everyone tells him it's impossible." Jacob felt his throat tighten. Of course she'd picked this movie. "Sounds familiar," he said lightly. Maya grinned at him. "That's why I picked it. Also, the fish are really pretty." They watched in comfortable silence, laughing at the same parts. Maya providing running commentary on the marine biology. That's not actually how clownfish work, but whatever. When the credits rolled, she was half asleep, curled up against Jacob's side. "Dad," she murmured. "I'm happy." 3 words. So simple, so profound. "Me too, baby girl, me too." He carried her to bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead. She was already mostly asleep, but she mumbled something he could barely hear. "Love you to the moon and back." Jacob smiled, his heart full. "To the stars and beyond, Maya. To the stars and beyond." He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her sleep, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The grief, the search, the courtroom, the healing. It hadn't been easy. It would never be easy, probably. There would always be empty spaces where David and Sarah should be. There would always be moments when Maya's loss hit her fresh and new, when Jacob would hold her while she cried and wish he could take the pain away. But there was this too, this house, this life, this family they'd built from the wreckage, this love that had endured through the worst and come out stronger on the other side. Jacob Reeves had been many things in his life: a sailor, a warrior, a SEAL, a brother, a friend. Now he was something he never expected to be, something harder and more rewarding than any mission he'd ever run. He was a father, and he wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. In a courthouse across town, Judge Eleanor Martinez was working late again. She often did, reviewing case files for tomorrow's hearings, trying to prepare herself for the decisions she would have to make. On her desk, propped against the lamp, was a photograph of a man and a little girl at the beach. She looked at it now, as she did every day, and smiled. In her 25 years on the bench, she had learned that the law could only do so much. It could provide structure, protection, consequences, but it couldn't force people to love each other. It couldn't heal trauma or mend broken hearts. What it could do, what she could do, was create space for love to work its own magic. Give it room, get out of its way. She picked up her pen and turned back to the case files. Tomorrow there would be more families, more children, more impossible choices. Tomorrow she would put on her robe and do her best to see clearly, to judge fairly, to remember that behind every case number was a human being who deserved compassion. But tonight she let herself remember that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, love won. That sometimes a warrior crossed an ocean to find one small girl. That sometimes families were broken and then remade, different but whole, scarred but surviving. That sometimes miracles happened in courtrooms. Judge Martinez turned off her lamp, gathered her things, and went home. Behind her, in the darkness of her chambers, the photograph caught the glow of the streetlights through the window. A man, a girl, a sunset, a promise kept, and across town in a house by the ocean, a former Navy SEAL and his daughter were watching the stars. "That one's really bright tonight," Maya said, pointing at a star just above the horizon. "That's Venus," Jacob told her. "Not actually a star. It's a planet. Daddy would have known that. He knew all the constellations. He did. He used to navigate by them on missions. Said the stars were the only thing you could always count on. They were always there, even when everything else was chaos." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he's up there, with Mommy?" Jacob considered the question carefully. I think they're wherever love goes, when the person who held it is gone. Maybe that's the stars. Maybe it's something else entirely. But I know they're still with us in some way. I feel them sometimes, when you laugh, when you do something brave, when you remind me so much of both of them that it takes my breath away." Maya leaned against him, and Jacob put his arm around her shoulders. "I'm happy, Dad," she said. "Really happy. Is that okay? Is it okay to be happy when they're gone?" "It's more than okay," Jacob said. "It's what they would have wanted. It's what they fought for. You having a good life. That's all any parent wants for their child. And you? Are you happy?" Jacob looked at his daughter, this incredible, resilient, loving child who had become the center of his universe. "Yeah," he said. "I really am." They sat there until the moon rose, two people who had found each other through grief and held on through love, building something new from the ashes of everything they'd lost. It wasn't the family any of them had planned for, but it was family, and that was everything. The end.